In this lab, we're going to take a look at the hierarchy and hierarchy service. So hierarchies are a new concept that came in with Niagara 4, and they allow us to build menus of items. But this is a feature that's very much around the use of tags. So if you're not going to use the tags, the hierarchies won't present any data. And it's then understanding why and when you would use a hierarchy. So there are a couple of applications for use of a hierarchy. One of them would be a navigation aid through a station. So you could, for example, build a menu structure, one for handling units, one for chillers, one for fan coils. And when you go within that menu structure, you can see all of those items. And it's really appreciating that maybe hierarchies are not suitable for every single project. So again, a small plant room, not much use for a hierarchy. But where you've got a multi-location customer, like the McDonald's style approach of hundreds of remote sites coming back to a central server, there is potentially a great use for hierarchies. It's not just about navigation aids, because that is one use case, but it is also about searching a station. So there's a very big difference between a targeted search across an entire station, which could take a very long time to complete, versus a targeted search on a hierarchy, because you've built a menu of specific items and it'll take a lot less time to complete the search against that fixed list of items than the entire station. So we're going to take a look at what's involved and how it works. So in this lab, we're going to start at the end and take a look at what you can achieve first of all. So in my station, in my hierarchy tree structure, I've got some items that have been pre-created. Now the hierarchy icon at the bottom of the station list is just a way of viewing what has been created. So there's no engineering that's carried out in here. If we right click on it, there is not a property sheet, there is no wire sheet. We can't actually do anything within here. This is just a list of items that have been created. And the actual creation of this item is done from elsewhere inside the station. So it's within config, services, and within here, there's an item called the hierarchy service. So we're going to take a look shortly about how we go about creating these items. And you can create very simplistic ones or very complex, elaborate hierarchies. But what we're going to do first of all is take a look through what we've got created, and then go and look at how that has happened. So I've got several hierarchies available here. The first one is called points. I'm going to double click on it, and it takes a couple of seconds to load, but it just gives me a list of the points inside the station. So on one of the very first labs we did about tagging, we tagged up some points, and then we used the quick search function in the top right to go and do a search. For example, n:point, hit return, and it will go and find everything with that tag inside the station. This first one is an example of that exact functionality. The second item in my hierarchy is called inputs and outputs. Again, I'm just going to double click on it. And this time, there's a bit more of a structure going on. So I'm just going to fan that out with its little triangle at the side. So we've got sensors, drivers, and boilers. So rather than it just being one long list of points, as shown in the first one, this second hierarchy is starting to organise items into more of a structure. So sensors, anything that's a sensor or an input, drivers, anything that's an output, and boilers, presumably anything that meets a boiler requirement. But again, we'll take a look at how that functions more in a second. Okay, my third hierarchy is called devices, and I'm going to just again expand that out. So underneath there, I've got a BACnet folder and I've got a Modbus folder. So it's performing a search inside the station based on some very specific tags, and then based on those results, it's starting to organize them into different structures. So anything that's a Modbus device, anything that's a backnet device. And as I demonstrated in the first part of the video, that could be based on equipment types rather than protocols. So it could be air handling units, chillers, energy meters, and so on. But it's just about going and finding things in a station and organising them in a particular way. And we're starting to get into some more complex hierarchies at this point. So the next one I'm interested in is called floors. Again, I'm going to double click and we can see what's available in there. I'm just going to fan it out. So I've got floor 0, floor 1 and floor 99. And if I start to expand those folders out, again, we're seeing specific items in there. So from our tagging lab, one of the things we added was a floor tag. We added that floor tag to some points, and then we inputted specific information into that tag. And then this particular hierarchy is going searching for that tag, and then based on the results it finds, again, organising the data in a particular way. And in a minute, when we get to the hierarchy service, we'll take a look at how that's been achieved. And then we start to have some more advanced hierarchies. So we've got sites and equipment, sites and equipment and points, and then a much more advanced hierarchy structure. So sites just gives me a list of tagged sites. So it could be a couple, or it could be dozens of those. Sites and equipment, I can see the site and underneath it the associated equipment within that site. Then I've got sites, equipment and points. So as I start to fan these out, underneath I can see all the associated points that are within that hierarchy structure. And then a really advanced one where it's based on a country, a region within the country, and then a site location within that region, and then the equipment within that site and the points within those pieces of equipment. So it's a way of really grouping things together in a very specific way. So what we're going to do next is look at how we can build these hierarchies, and then after that we're going to take a look at how we can back up the hierarchy service to reuse it on the next project, because some of these are complicated. They will take some time to set up, and if you've done the work once, you might as well reuse it again in the future on the next project and speed up the delivery of this particular item. So we're now going to take a look at how to construct a hierarchy. And we're going to navigate into the station, config, services, and within here there's a thing called the hierarchy service. So double click and it takes us into the AX property sheet. Now all the items in here come from the palette, and the palette is called hierarchy. And I'm starting with some pre-built items, and we're just going to run through each one of these and understand what they look like and how they set up. And then we'll look at how to create a new one, and then also how to bring one in from a palette. So my first one is called points, and I'm just going to click into it. Now the trick with the hierarchies are, when we're within the hierarchy, not to keep clicking into specific items, but to stay at the top level, in this case the points hierarchy, and then if we want to see further configuration, fan the items out, then we can see what's going on. But by staying at the top, we can see the entire picture and understand what's going on. If we keep clicking in, we potentially go too far and can't see another piece of information that's important and related to how it works. So the name at the top here is points, and I can go right click and rename, and I'll just call it station points. And whatever name we give it at the hierarchy level at the top is what will appear at the bottom of a tree structure, which we'll see that in a minute. And then this first one is a very simplistic hierarchy. So it's got this component here called a query level def. So that comes from the palette, and it's effectively a very clunky way of saying what tag do you want to search for. So it's performing a query into the station, and the query that's being performed is n:point. So if I came up to my search bar, typed n:point, hit return, it will go off and it will search for those specific tags, and it'll give me a list of results. So whenever I make a change to anything in the hierarchy service, I want to come down to the hierarchy, right click and do a refresh node, and then whatever has happened, it'll go and rebuild. So in this case, I just change the name. So underneath here is a list of all the components that have a point tag. Now, if I wanted to go and look at a specific thing and understand what's going on, so right click, edit the tags. There may be some direct tags that we've earlier added, but there are also a bunch of these implied tags. And one of these implied tags is n:point. Now we can take any of these items and make it go and do a search. So as an example, if I just wanted numeric writables or numeric points, I could go and change the search. So I'm just going to do a Control and C to copy. And I'm going to change this search now to go n:type equals open quotations. Got to do a paste with Control and V. Close quotations. Do a save. And then again, I'm going to come down to my hierarchy service, right click, refresh. It'll force it to go and rebuild. Then I'm going to go into this station points one, and it's now only finding the specific thing that I've asked for. But you can make this any type of combination you want. So it could be n:point and b:temp as an example. Do a save, hit refresh, and then I'm just going to go and refresh this view, and it will rebuild the list based on the tags that you've asked it to go and search for. So this is a very, very basic example. In the real world, probably not much use. You could build a hierarchy of space temperatures, supply temperatures, return temperatures, and so on. But it's about the application of that list. So we're going to start to look at the more complicated ones now. Outputs. Again, I'm just going to click into it. So we've just got that piece of information available. And there are two items in the list now. I've got, again, a query level def, which is n:point. And then I've got a second item called a list level def, which again comes from a palette. And if I expand the list level def out, it has some further items inside it. So it's got these named group definitions, which is again an item from the palette. And I'm just going to expand each of these out. So the names that I give things here, so the name of the top level item is not that important in this case. So the hierarchy here, inputs and outputs, is what will appear in the list. But these subcomponents don't necessarily matter. So query level def is not important, it doesn't display. But what's going on is it's doing a search across the station for anything with a point tag, and then it's passing those results further up to these items, and then these items are starting to filter out what's going on. So sensors, I'm just going to right click and rename here to inputs. Drivers, I'm going to right click and rename to outputs. And then the third one is called boilers. So it's got to have a point tag. That's the first thing that happens. All the points are taken in. Then it's got to be a point tag and an input tag. This one's going, it's got to be a point tag and an output tag. And then the third one is going, it's got to be a point tag and any combination of these other things. So haystack flow or return or boiler or pump. So I'm just going to refresh the tree again. Inputs and outputs. So now the folders have renamed to match the items that I renamed a second ago. So inputs are any point that has an input tag, i.e. they are read-only. Outputs are writable points or adjustable points. So they've got to have a writable tag on them. And then the boilers, it's not finding any results. So I'm just going to navigate down to my plant room and just add a boiler tag to a couple of the points and then refresh and see what happens. So boiler 1 enable, right click, edit tags. It's not got a tag there now. I'm just going to add a tag dynamically, HS:boiler. So this is what we call an ad hoc tag. Boiler 2 enable, same process, edit a tag. I'm just going to add a tag right now. It's a marker. And then because I made a change, I'm just going to force a refresh. So the hierarchies are dynamic in that they'll rebuild and find new tags. So if you bring on one site today, the tags will come in and potentially start working. You bring on another 2 sites tomorrow, and providing they're tagged in a particular way, the hierarchy will just dynamically update and show you the new things that have been brought into the station. So we're starting to see more organisational structure being brought in rather than just a huge list of points. So the next hierarchy I'm going to look at is the devices one. I'll click inside it. And again, there's a couple of items going on. So the query level def will always be present because that is the most basic part of any hierarchy. It's got to go and find some piece of information. So in this instance, it's going finding anything with a Niagara : device tag. So if I was to just expand a network, right click on something and go edit tags, there may or may not be a direct tag depending on what you've done, but in the implied tags, one of them is an N:(device mark tag. Okay, and then the second part of it is a list level def again, and then within a named group definition, so the folder structure that's going on. The first one is BACnet, the second one is Modbus. So the BACnet one is looking for a type. There is a BACnet component and a BACnet device. The Modbus one is looking specifically for a Modbus TCP gateway device. Now if you're adding different Modbus networks in, so RS485 or TCP, those tags will change. How do you know what those tags are? Well, it is a case of either doing this a lot and understanding the tags off the top of your head, or right click on a component, go in, edit tags, and then again looking at those implied tags to understand what's already available without having to go and do extra tagging. So if I wanted to now add a different one, I could right click on one of these and go duplicate, and then I could make it for an MBus network or a KNX network and adjust those tags to suit. Okay, so the next one I'm going to look at is the floors hierarchy. Again, click into it, and we're just seeing this particular one. At the bottom, we've got the query level def. The order of these is important. The query does have to be at the bottom. So N:(point again. So if it's easier to think of, the first thing that happens is it goes and does a search, finds all, in this case, the points. Those list of results are then passed along to this group level definition. So again, that's a component that comes from a palette. And then what it's doing is it's starting to filter the results by one specific tag, in this case, B:floor. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go and have a look at that floor tag. So in lab exercises, basic lab, right click, edit the tags. So we've got B:floor, and it's floor 00. Edit tags, floor 1. Edit tags on this one, floor 99. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click on minimum temp, edit the tags. I'm going to add a new floor tag, so the basic dictionary, floor, and I'm going to call this all and just go save. So now I'm not going to adjust this in any way, but because I have added a new tag. I'm going to force a refresh, which will make it go and rebuild the hierarchy. Expand floors out. So all floors, I've got minimum temperature. Floor 0, floor 1, floor 99. And you could even then make that more complex and make it based on rooms within a floor, within a building. And it's a way of specifically, again, grouping these items together. One of the uses would be navigation or reviewing data, but it's not just about that. So if we start to look at things like Niagara analytics or doing a complex query inside the station, again, it's this concept of if it's a big station, it's going to take a lot longer to search against the entire station than searching against a specific set of data that we've created. Okay, and then we do have some other hierarchies that are brought in. These are not part of a lab, they're just an example of what's possible. So we've got sites, which is a fairly simplistic one on a site tag, but they do start to get very complicated very quickly now. So sites and equipment. So one of the things we've not really touched on, because it does get really complicated, is that we've seen we can tag points with direct tags. This is a temperature, this is a room, and so on. But there are other tags that we call relationship tags, and it defines a relationship between potentially a point and a piece of equipment or a point in a building. I will do some other videos later that go into hierarchies in much more detail, but it's a bit too complex for the basic TCP course. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new hierarchy. So I'm going to grab one from a tree, drag it in, and I'm going to call it temperatures. Okay, and then within there, I'm going to grab a query level depth, drag and drop. The name of the query level depth is not important. You could describe it if you wanted to. I'm just going to keep the default name. And then I'm going to ask it to go and search for something inside the station. So I'm interested in temperatures. So I'm going to go with B:temp or C:temp or H4:temp. So we can do this or this or this, or this and this, or this and this, not that. You can make the queries more complex. I'm just going to go save for a second. Come down to my hierarchy at the bottom of the tree. Again, force a refresh because I've changed something. And then I'm going to expand that out. And I can see that there's 4 items in that list. Now it does depend on what I've tagged, so I'm just going to go and look at the tags in my plant room. So my boiler flow temperature, I'm going to go edit tags. So there's no tag there right now. I'm going to go and select class lab, and I'm going to select the temperature tag. So C:temp, do a save. And then again, I'm just going to force a refresh of the hierarchy, and it goes and picks up that new tag, and that new item will appear in the list. That's a really basic example of a hierarchy. I'm now going to show you how to bring in one that's potentially been backed up previously. So with a lot of the items in Niagara, it is possible that you can start from nothing and build up a particular item. But sometimes this involves a lot of effort and a lot of work. So the hierarchies are a complex item, and some of these ones we've demonstrated are really quite simplistic ones. Maybe not that useful on live projects because you maybe want a certain level of sophistication to them to make them useful. So when we're building really sophisticated ones, we will back them up probably to a palette file. Then in the future, you might not do it again for 6 months, but the next time you need to do a hierarchy, rather than sitting there for hours getting it to work properly, you could just drag one straight in from your palette and it'll probably start working straight away. So I'm going to go to my palette, I'm going to go open, browse, user home, Niagara 4 TCP resources, and my Niagara 4 TCP palette. And within there's a hierarchy service, so I'm just going to expand that out. And here's one for alarm consoles. Just going to drag and drop that in. Expand it out, and again there's two things going on. One is it's got to have a type of alarm console recipient, and then the second one is it's going to organize them into a list based on particular things. So let's just go down and refresh the hierarchy. So that appears, alarms, and I've got view all. Now I'm going to repeat this again, but I'm going to do it in a way that I'm going to not do it from scratch. I'm going to right click on an existing one and go duplicate, and I'm going to call it graphics. Okay, now I'm going to go and look at an item that has a graphic on it and go edit tags. No direct tags have been added to this folder. Implied tags. One of the implied tags is called n:has px view. So I'm going to use that as a way of going and doing the search. So get rid of whatever's there already. n:has px view. These are case sensitive, so we do need to respect the camel case tag approach that's going on. Save that. Right click, refresh. Then my new item has appeared in the list, and then it's listing me everywhere inside the station that has this specific tag. So then I can just double click on a component and quickly get to a graphic. But you could build that as an AHU graphic. So it's got to have a view and it has to have an handling unit tag. No limitation to what you can build. We're just showing you some of the examples that are available. Like I said, if you're interested in more complicated hierarchies, recommend you go and look at the advanced video that we'll be creating and making available. That'll go into a lot more detail about how to use relationship tags and build these more complicated structures.